Welcome to the Daksha Legal online seminar. Today's subject is COVID-19 reality check. The media, public discussions, and the social network discussions have contributed much confusion in the minds of the general public. And the effort of Daksha Legal is to see the ground realities with the help of the experts in the field. We have with us today three doctors who are also experts in the field. Dr. Ravindra, MBBS, D. Artho, MS Artho, is a medical director and chief of orthopedic services at Suguna Hospital. He has about 3 decades of experience in trauma, spine, and joint replacement surgeries. Past president of Bangalore Orthopedic Society, ex-chairman Election Commission Indian Medical Association. Presently, he is the president of Private Hospitals and Nursing Homes Association, FANA, Karnataka. He is also the chairman of Nursing Home Subcommittee, Indian Medical Association, Karnataka. And he is the president of Indian Medical Association, Rajajinagar branch. And he is a sitting member of Karnataka Medical Council. Dr. Srinivas Kakilaya, he got his MBBS from KMC Mangalore 1988 and MD Medicine from KMC Hubli 1992. He is practicing in Mangalore since then. He is actively involved in public health programs such as control of malaria and dengue. He is also a writer, a columnist in Vijay Karnataka and Kannada Prabha. He has written a book on flu, Endu Edarovarige, in 2010 about H1 and N1. He won Dr. Chandrappa Gowda Award from Karnataka Sangha Shumaga and anthology of articles published as columns titled Arogya Ashaya, awarded by Karnataka Sahitya Parishad and Karnataka Science and Technology Award. Dr. Ranganatha had his post-graduation from Mysore Medical College in 2004. He has been working in Narayana Hrudayalaya in the capacity of consultant for last 14 years. He is actively involved in postgraduate training. He has few national and international publications. So on behalf of Daksha Legal and also the members of Daksha Legal, I welcome you all, sir. So we will commence with 3 aspects. One is the clinical aspect of COVID, the origin and the international and national and international scenario and its present condition as such. That would be answered and taken by Dr. Ranganatha. The next one is the private health sector's contribution in the field of medical treatment to COVID patients. That would be answered and debated by Dr. Ravindra. And finally, the government's intervention, whether it is positive or negative, and its effects and adverse effects, if any, on the entire scenario. This would be answered by Dr. Srinivas Kakilaya. So each of you will have 5 to 10 minutes. Thereafter, we'll start the question and answer session. I request Dr. Ranganatha to take over the first aspect of the matter, that is the global scenario and the national scenario of the pandemic in present scenario. 1 minute. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Basura, sir. So basically what I'm going to talk about is how it started and how it has progressed and what is the situation now and what are the few things which can cause the infection and how it progresses as a disease. I'll be largely confining myself to the clinical aspects of it, and I would not touch upon the policies and the regulations which are required to manage this condition and manage this pandemic as a whole. So basically what started as a cluster of pneumonia cases in Wuhan, China city, which was linked to the viral infections and became an epidemic within that place. Soon it spread all over the world. In February, it was called COVID-19. COVID stands for coronavirus. Coronavirus. Started as a cluster of pneumonia cases in Wuhan, China. It was linked to the viral infections and became an epidemic within that place. It became a kind of an epidemic. It spread within that community. Later, actually, it spread across the world now. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We will hear you, sir.
Yeah. I mean, am I hearing the echo, or somebody was asking the question there?
No problem. Yes, tell me, sir.
Okay. So basically that it's spread across the world now. In February, WHO called this as a COVID. COVID stands for coronavirus illness. The coronavirus induced viral illness. And so in March, it was the WHO declared this condition as a pandemic, which most of the countries in the world has developed the infection. The origin of this coronavirus is linked to the bats. It's originated from the bats, but now its major mode of transmission is person to person. It usually happens in viral infection where it can get originated from the animals, and then later the transmission persists or the transmission continues from person to person. This is what has happened in coronavirus also. So it was first, the investigation first led to the seafood market, and from there it was taken off. Though we have no evidence to say that the meat or the seafood would, consumption of seafood or the meat would cause the viral infection. So the clinical symptoms of this is like a regular upper respiratory tract infection. Like you will have a fever, cold, and myalgia. Myalgia means muscle aches, and a fever with chills. Some people can also have loose motions and those kind of abdominal symptoms. The peculiar symptoms, which is not very common, but which is seen is the loss of taste and loss of smelling. I mean, loss of smell, what we call anosmia. These are all linked to these symptoms. Though it is kind of a characteristic of this COVID symptom, but these symptoms are associated with milder disease. Or I'm talking about the loss of smell and the loss of taste. But these majority of these patients, to the tune of around 80 to 85% of these patients, resolve by themselves with a symptomatic treatment. Around 15% of these patients can get into a severe course, may require hospitalization, and out of that, 5% may need an ICU care as well, intensive care treatment. And looking at the case fatality, the number of people dying out of 100, this thing is roughly around 2 to 3%. So it means to say if every 100 person infected, around 3 people are dying. So this is the case fatality ratio, what we are seeing. It's slightly higher than the influenza what we see. At this point in time, we really have no definitive treatment, though we have an antiviral like favipiravir and the remdesivir, and the effectiveness is not proven beyond doubt. But in the ground, we have been working for the last few months, and we have started in Karnataka, we have started seeing the increased number of cases. On the ground, I feel the early initiation of the antivirals has a definitive role, and people are getting better with the antiviral. But the definitive role and the evidence has yet to come. So at this point of time, prevention is the best option what we have. And for the prevention, so what is the best way of prevention? We need to understand what is the way it spreads. The way it spreads, as I earlier told, it is by person to person. A person's coughing, person talking, person sneezing, kind of produces droplets which can travel around 6 feet, around 2 meters of distance, and a person come in contact with that and people inhales that droplet, the infection will lodge into the other person and develop an infection. Also, if a person who's sneezed or coughed and the droplets are settled in the surfaces which is touched by the other person, and the hand touching that infected hand to the contaminated hand to the eyes, nose and mouth can also cause the infection. Though the definitive way of, though how much it contributes to the spread and the pool of the cases is still doubtful, but the definite way is person to person and the droplet infection, what we call. So at this point of time, the best prevention what we can is avoiding gathering and wearing the mask. Wearing the mask has definitely shown to reduce the transmission, and the avoiding the gathering and has really helped. These are the few things. If you look at the magnitude, where we stand, if you look at the numbers, So world, as if you look at the total overall, the world statistics, I think the world has crossed 20 million cases with 7 lakh deaths. India, we have touched around 2 million with 40,000 deaths. In Karnataka, we have around 1.5 lakhs cases with 2,000, closely around 2,800 deaths. In Bangalore, around 67,000 cases with around 1,000 deaths. It's a significant cases and it's fairly spreading quite fast. So at this point of time, as I told you, the prevention is the best chance to spread this and decrease the mortality. So what I do is, I think there are a lot of issues and a lot of things needs to be covered in the as a clinical aspects. But it would be better if people ask particular questions, and if as a moderator, Mr. Basavaraj asks me the questions, so we can answer particular issues. So
I shall come back to you later, sir. Now, I request Dr. Ravindra to speak about the participation and contribution of the private health sector in the present scenario. Dr. Ravindra, sir, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Basavaraj. And I should really appreciate this great initiative that you have taken. And I always, I started as a client. Now I become your friend, and I'm one of your biggest fans because you're doing a great job in Daksha Legal, and keep up the good work, sir. Coming to the involvement of the private hospitals and private sector in the management of COVID-19 pandemic, like most of you should be knowing, almost 80% of the healthcare in India is provided by the private hospitals, and of the private hospitals, most of the private hospitals, at least 70% of the hospitals are small hospitals. About 20 to 25% of the hospitals are mid-sized hospitals, that is between 50 to 100 beds. And about only 5% of the hospitals are having more than 100 beds. When we are talking about large hospitals like the corporate hospitals, they have less than 5% of the beds in the private healthcare. FANA is an organization. I'm the president of FANA. FANA is an organization that is about 21 years old. And we started mainly as a Bangalore-based association. Now we have Pan-Karnataka membership. And like I was telling you earlier, the 80% of the healthcare is provided by the private hospitals, of which 95% of the non-cardiac tertiary care is provided by the private hospitals. This is across Karnataka. And about 75% of the cardiac healthcare is also provided by the private hospitals. Coming to the COVID situation, like Dr. Rangnath was saying, the COVID really, we started seeing the cases in mid to late February, and Karnataka was one of the early states to take up the initiative on managing the COVID-19 crisis. And like all of us know, the first lockdown was introduced in the country in Karnataka. And initially, the private hospitals were told by the government not to admit COVID-19 patients, because at that time there were not many COVID-19 patients in the community, and the government had enough infrastructure. So initially, end March, May, June, and till about mid-June, only the government hospitals were admitting the COVID-19 patients. Subsequently, when the numbers increased on the 26th of June, the private hospitals were also asked to admit and treat the COVID-19 patients. As per the present government orders, 50% of the beds in the private hospitals have been reserved for COVID-19 patients across the categories for government allotment. The government has made two schemes. One is for the government allotment, they've taken 50% of the beds in the hospitals, wherein the rates are fixed by the government, and it's paid by the Suvarna Arogya Suraksha Trust, which is the nodal agency for managing all the schemes in Karnataka. The other 50% of the beds, the private hospitals are managing both COVID and non-COVID patients. And to a great extent, we are managing the problem without affecting both the COVID and the non-COVID patients. Like you all know, there is a existing non-COVID disease burden in the community. And to a certain extent, the non-COVID work has got affected, and most of the hospitals we are doing only emergency and urgent surgeries, elective surgeries, and non-priority surgeries are being postponed because in today's situation, COVID is the problem that we need to address. Having said that, there are a lot of misgivings, I'm sure, in the community and amongst the participants and audience here about the media campaigning about the private hospitals not cooperating, not providing beds not being available, about overcharging. See, there are beds available in the private hospitals. There are enough beds available. And as per the current statistics as of today evening, 5 p.m., there are about as of 5 p.m. today, there are about 696 COVID beds in the government hospitals, of which only 455 are occupied, 245 are still available. In the government medical colleges, there are 819 beds, of which 689 are occupied and 130 are vacant. In the private hospitals, there are 5,186, of which only 1,567 are occupied and 3,619 are vacant for allotment. So that should give an indication of the beds available for COVID-19. And but there was an initial problem because of allotment, because there was no central nodal agency to allot the beds. So initially, about 15-20 days back, the patients were running around from hospital, and there was an issue with that. And of late, sporadically, we hear that some of the patients are not getting beds or are being denied admissions. No patient is being denied admissions, but some of the non-COVID patients are finding it a problem getting beds because if we know that the patient is non-COVID, we can always provide him a bed. If we know he is a COVID positive patient, we can also provide him a bed. But there are some categories of patients which are suspect. We are not very sure whether they are COVID or non-COVID. So we cannot keep them either with non-COVID patients or with the COVID patients. So now we have also provided suspect beds in all the hospitals so that no patient is denied any care. And coming to the accusation of overcharging, most of it is the figment of imagination of the media. And because government has even much before they allowed the private hospitals to admit the patients, they have capped the prices of the treatment for COVID illness, both for the government patients as well as the private patients. And in spite of the capping, sometimes the patients might feel that the hospital is overcharged because it all depends on the comorbidities. If the patient comes with COVID-19 and he has other diseases, they come with stroke with COVID-19, heart attack with COVID-19, or kidney disease, dialysis with COVID-19. So it adds to the cost, but not too much. Marginally, it does. And also, like Dr. Rangnath was saying, there are new medicines which are quite expensive, antivirals for the treatment of these are not actually included in the government capped prices. So that adds to the cost. And all the private hospitals, we take the patient into confidence. They are told about the costing and only then admitted. And when the costly medicines or costly investigations are done, the patients are adequately counseled. Lastly, before I finish my talk and take the question and answers, I would like to assure each one of you who is participating in this webinar to understand that hospitals are safe. We don't have to really panic. And I see a lot of people, they're trying to postpone routine visits to the doctors, or they're trying to sit and wait on their problems, which they think is not important. If you have a problem, please call your doctor or visit the hospital. All the hospitals are safe. We have segregated the non-COVID and COVID outpatients. We have all the major hospitals. We have fever clinics where the patients are screened and triaged before they enter. So there is no mix-up. If you have if you have a serious problem or a concern with your health, please don't hesitate to visit your doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I now call upon Dr. Srinivas Kakilaya to take over the question as to what the government is doing under the circumstances, and if you have any grievances against the government, without naming any minister, without naming any political party, against the system, there are a lot of allegations. There is a tendency that if a common man were to be admitted, he will go to the the government hospital. When it comes to ministers, they will always prefer the 5-star hospitals. At the same time, the government is not cooperating with us, especially in the private sector, under the circumstances. So I wanted to know your views on this, sir. You have to unmute yourself, sir, I think. Sir, you have to unmute. Sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much at the outset for this webinar, and good evening all of you. Now, I have a little different perspective on this, so I hope my colleagues wouldn't mind my sharing my views on this. See, unfortunately, we don't seem to learn lessons from mistakes of the past. I'm saying this because in 2009, when we came across a very similar situation with regard to what was then called as a new flu virus, novel flu virus. And the government of the day at that point of time also did something similar. They said, we will test everybody, come to the hospitals, nothing to worry. Then some of us had to tell the government, look here, if you're testing everyone, when it is in fact almost 30% of the population, you may have to spend about 2 lakh crore rupees only on testing. So then immediately the guidelines were changed, and nothing much happened with regard to H1N1. All have experienced that. Except that for about 9 to 10 months, our doctors were made to check everybody at the railway station and bus stations and airports. But H1N1 came, and those of us who got infected, we got infected. Few of them did. That's what happened. But this kind of the panic and that was sought to be created, it did not succeed. But 10 years later, today we are seeing a different thing. So the most perplexing or most paining part of the whole is that we had in the last 10 years much better technology, much more advancements in science and media and publishing in our medical journals. So to perspective, if I can take one, first case of this new infection was detected on November 17th. And December 12th, the first patients were admitted with severe disease. Within 10 days, 27th December, the Chinese doctors and the Chinese scientists were able to identify the new virus. They sequenced the genome, they found its proteins, they found the receptors on the surface of the virus, and they said this is a different virus but related to the old SARS virus, but a coronavirus, and they told us how it can spread, it can infect, and all the details were given to the world within 10 days of first case getting admitted in the hospital. Now we go back 10 years ago, it had taken 4 months. So this time we did it in 10. And on January 4th, WHO announced it to the world. January 7th gave a new name to the virus. And another 2 months later, the end of February, the Chinese doctors published details of 77,000 patients admitted in Wuhan. With all the details, the minus details, how many were admitted, how many had fever, how many had cough, how many were having problems, severe disease, how many died, and why they died, on the spectrum of complications and associated disease, all these details were put before all us in 2 months. So by the time this started spreading, getting established in other parts of the world, we all had all details. But did we use this information, use this detail wisely? The answer is no. That is the saddest part. See, we have the technology, we have the best of media. When I say best media, it is the ability to dissipate knowledge. But the way we have used this is very, very stupid, you can use that word. I'm not just talking of my country, it is all over the world. Look at the way the countries locked down from America to Europe to India. Everywhere countries were down, schools were shut down, your court closed. But does this infection, this corona new infection, does this deserve this kind of an exaggerated response is the question we all have to ask to. Because 64 days of lockdown in India, the estimated economic loss is nearly 125 lakh crores. 10 to 30% of the GDP is supposed to have been lost. 80% of households lost their earnings. And poverty is expected to go up sky high. And all those who have lost all the businesses that have been shut down are very, very unlikely to reopen soon. So this is the first point I have to make. Now, second, coming to what is happening to the care of corona patients. Now, with regard to this also, at personal level, I have been writing on the mainstream media, I have been speaking about it, and I have written to the government also. See, the Indian doctor and the doctors in the US had made very simple points and very educative points very early in the course. In March itself, both Italian and New York doctors published in very reputed journals, New England Journal of Medicine, that when the coronavirus strikes, it will infect at the peak of the infection. 30 to 40% of the local population are going to be infected. So therefore, please do not call all these fellows, all these infected persons to hospitals. Don't do the mistake that we did. This is what they wrote. The doctor somebody wrote so in Niger. They said, don't call these people. They do not have to go to hospital. They do not have to get tested. Most of them, almost 90-95% will recover on their own in 4 to 5 days without the need for any testing, without need for any treatment. Then they said, the remaining 5 to 10% who may land up more severe illness, of them about 7% will require oxygen. You can probably arrange oxygen therapy at home or organize local hospitals for providing oxygen. And those who get seriously ill only need to be brought to tertiary care centers. So please reserve the tertiary care hospitals only for the severely ill. Now these points, at least from my side, I sent these reports to the government, and I also made a detailed protocol presentation to the government of Karnataka saying that please ask the people to stay at home if they develop symptoms of fever, cough, sore throat, and newly added symptoms like loss of smell, loss of taste, and about 20% may also have diarrhea. So this is a very interesting combination that we see in the new COVID disease, that they have respiratory symptoms as well as gastrointestinal symptoms in the form of diarrhea. So if any one of the persons has fever, sore throat, cough, runny nose, or diarrhea in any combination, they need to sit at home and then inform the helpline or inform their local doctor, take instructions from them. This is very important. If they go out in search of a test, in search of a doctor, on the way, in the auto rickshaw, or in a bus, or in a car, they're likely to spread the infection to everybody. But what are they going to gain doing a test? Nothing. By going to a doctor, nothing, because we are not going to need treatment for them in the early stages. There is no treatment available, no treatment needed. So the government should have started this campaign very early in March, first week or second week, when we wrote to them that it should have asked people to stay at home. They made some attempts. The central government published one poster, and it was also the masthead of Google for a few days. Some of you must notice, feeling sick, stay home. But then it disappeared. Karnataka government started a helpline 1210. ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲೇ ಇರಿ, ತೊಂದರೆ ಆದರೆ ಇದ್ದರೆ ಫೋನ್ ಮಾಡಿ, but then it died or it get the publicity that it did. So then they insist that people should sit at home. We created fever clinics, we created COVID care centers, and we invited people to get tested, to come to the hospitals, to come to the fever clinic. Now, this is what really created confusion and panic and fear among people. We could have avoided, but we did not want to have this. We deliberately, probably, I don't know the reasons why it has happened, but we did not avoid. It has happened. You know what is happening now. So the result is that what the Indian doctors from New York told us not to do, and what some of us requested the government not to do, and to follow the Indian doctors' advice, we did the very same that we should not have done in the first. So the result is that there is a lot of panic, a lot of fear. Everybody is running here and there, and there are no beds in the hospitals. As Dr. Ravindra said, the government has now reserved 50% of beds in private hospitals to COVID care patients. But what is happening? The ground reality is that these 50% beds are not getting occupied, and the other 50%, the other patients are also coming to these hospitals for fear of getting COVID from these hospitals. So virtually most hospitals, Dr. Ravindra can correct me if I'm wrong, this is what I'm seeing in Mangalore. Last 4 months, most of the hospitals have remained empty. All the elective procedures not happening, surgeries are not happening. People are so scared, they're not coming to the hospital. In many hospitals, salaries are not being paid. Doctors, at least 50 to 60% salary cut for doctors, another 56% salary cut to the nurses, 30 to 4% salary cut for the lower workers like AMs and others. So this is the reality of hospitals today. So I'll come by saying that we had all the opportunity, we had all the experts in this country, we have the best experts in the world, epidemiologists and virologists and everyone, but the governments from center to state did not take advantage of these efforts, and we have completely botched up the COVID care control as well as COVID care operations in our country. This is unfortunate, it should have happened. So I hope all of us today will take a decision on how to impress the government in moving forward, in rectifying these mistakes.
I'll come back to Dr. Ranganatha with a few questions. Sir, the one of the fundamental question which is being debated left, right, or center is community spread. Sir, you have to unmute yourself. Community spread, which the government is strongly denying, and which the doctor community is strongly supporting, that there is a community spread and you cannot get away with that. So what is your take on this aspect, sir?
If you ask me, I think community spread is there. So because we have been seeing cases.
Since all of us are just lawyers and general public, would you kindly explain what is the meaning of community spread?
Community spread is, if you say community spread, if you have a person who is diagnosed with the COVID, if you can't trace the contact where he has got it, where he has got the infection from. So generally, if you have an infection and if you are contacted from a definitive source, and if you can't really trace a definitive source, you call it as community spread. So it is there, and you would have got it from anywhere. So, if you in a day in and day out, what we are seeing in the OPDs, a person comes to you with upper respiratory tract infection symptoms, we test it, he is coming positive, and I may not been able to trace where he got the infection from, and that is very common situation, which for us tells that there is a community spread. But the seroprevalence, the antibody test, what the government of India has done in a few centers, which is the incidence or the prevalence of the infection is less than 1% of the 1%, which is point against the community spread. But a clinician's perspective and what we are seeing in the ground, there is a community spread has already happened.
Therefore, even without travel history and without even similar participation, for example, in some functions and some controversial events, even without that, there is a possibility of COVID.
Yes, that is what we are seeing actually. We are seeing without travel history, people have stayed at home for almost weeks together, and they develop symptoms, and when we test them, they're positive now. It is happening.
No, one usual doubt we have, of course, all of us will be sitting in our offices sometime, whether the air-conditioned room will aggravate the scenario. Car, for example.
It depends. Like a person, if you have an air conditioner with the air circulation which is not going out, and if there is a person who is infected, and all the people who are there inside can get infected.
But per se, AC room will not cause these kind of.
No. It's AC. The person inside the people who are there in the inside is not infected. AC would not spread that.
Now, one other question posed by some of the women is that they purchase the vegetable from the store. Now, with which material they have to wash it, because it cannot be washed with the sanitizer or soap. So this is the problem of womanhood are facing.
The spread of the infection through fomite is actually on a shaky ground, where with the secretion which is on the surfaces, which gets touched by the people, and then you getting the infections from that is actually on a shaky ground, because we really don't know. There are so many compounding factors: the environmental humidity, temperature, and the surface. Whether the viruses which are there on that is viable or not, we are not even sure. If you follow the simple hand washing, hand sanitization, wearing the mask, and for the food articles, it's just the regular water washing is good enough.
Sir, what are the common myths which you have perceived over the period of time, either by the media or the social network discussion? What are the common myths which you have unearthed, which have created a panic in the mind of the general public?
It's the myths about the ways it spreads. Myths about ways it spread. And generally, when you say, you need to clearly classify what is the high risk exposure, what is the low risk exposure. So to put it in perspective, the high risk exposure is if you are speaking for a person without mask for more than 15 minutes in less than 1 meter distance. That we call it as a high risk exposure. If the person has, one of the person has the COVID infection. Otherwise, all the other things are actually outdoor activity, like going for a jog, walking. All these things are low risk exposure. So if you look at the community living in the apartments, people are not allowed to go or take a walk around the apartments. If you ask me, those are all actually unnecessary.
Sir, one question, of course, all the three of you are practicing the modern medicine allopathy. There are claims by one person, Dr. Kajay, that they have found cure in Ayurveda, Ayush, Yuddhas, Unani, etc. What is your take on that? Of course, you may not be able to contradict the statement being, practicing on the allopathic side. Do you think that any such claims are worth being noticed by the government, the health department?
Sir, you want to take that question, sir?
Any one of you, either yourself or Dr. Ravindra or Srinivas, because all of you are practicing.
This is a very common thing that we see. When H1N1 came, the very same people aimed that Amritabli and so on and so forth will cure H1N1. But nothing happened. H1N1, it came when? Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, same thing with COVID. Same thing with COVID. Whenever a new infection comes, these people are, they jump forefront and claim that they cured the infection. The fact of the matter is, today more than or nearly 2 crore people have been infected. Out of that, almost 1 crore 25 lakh people have been cured all over the world. Whether it's Dr. Kajay or whether it's Ayurveda or Unani or whatever, things are reported only from few localities here and there. But we should remember that more than 1.3 crore people have already recovered without any treatment, as I said a little while earlier. So new corona is a very simple infection in the majority of people. 95% or more, it doesn't even cause symptoms. In the remaining, those who develop symptoms, majority of them have very mild symptoms for 4 or 5 days and goes on its own. You don't have to take any treatment, no drug. So where is the question of Ayurveda cure being found?
Sir, one question I wanted to ask is that COVID per se is not deadly unless it is connected with other ailments like BP, sugar, pneumonia. COVID per se is automatically curable without there being any medicine. That's what the general perception, it appears to be so. So what is your take on that, Dr. Srinivas, sir?
No, it's not, sir, not a general take. I'll tell you now, we have, as I said, have data from almost all the countries of crores of people who have been infected. The official figures are about 1.8 crores, but the actual numbers will be at least 30 to 50 times because we are not testing the asymptomatic patients. So majority of people are not even get tested. Even in India, they have now zero survey in Delhi and Mumbai, which shows that 30% of the population is already infected. And these zero surveys are not picked up each and every case. So overall, most patients get this infection do not have symptoms. So we have analyzed the infection fatality rate and what is called as case fatality rate. Top class experts like Dr. John Ioannidis of Stanford University, our own Dr. Jacob Joe from Vellore, our own Dr. Jayaprakash Mulil, they have written articles. And the Center for Global Development has also published a report on June. And what is the summary of all this? That in people who are less than 30 years of age, who have no coexisting disease, that means who are healthy and young, the mortality is 3 per million. That's almost nobody dies of COVID in that age. Between 30 and 45 or between 30 and 50, the mortality is very, very less. Maybe 1 in 10,000 or 2 in 10,000 or even less. Now, overall mortality in people who are F60 is said to be 0.03 to 0.5. That is 3 per 10,000 to 5 per 1,000. So, and 95% of patients who die of this illness are the ones who already have what we medical professionals call as metabolic syndrome. That is diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, and certain cancers like blood cancer. So now, what is this metabolic syndrome and what relationship with COVID? Now, this SARS virus, as I said in the beginning, we have identified how it enters the human cell. It uses a receptor called ACE2, and it is now established. This ACE2 receptor, or what we call the gate or the windows for the virus to enter the human cell, is the numbers of these gates are increased. These doors are increased by consumption of sugar, by high levels of insulin, and in people who are obese. People who are obese have lot more ACE2 receptors, so the virus has more place to stay and more gates to enter the human cells. That is why the patients, the so-called modern illness, the so-called lifestyle diseases, they get aggravated by COVID. So therefore, let me add it here itself, that one of the best ways to protect ourselves from COVID, which now the WHO has also been propagating, is that please stop eating sugars, stop drinking lots of fruit juices. I would even go to the extent, stop eating fruits, because fruits are sucrose and fructose, and all processed foods like breads and biscuits and pizzas and pastas and anything that is deep fried, which again increases your level of inflammation in the body. So if you take and also alcohol and smoke, all these add to metabolic syndrome, all these add to the inflammation. So taking care like this will also protect you from COVID. So, that's what I have to say on this.
Yeah, I'll also want to add a few things here. So I think in majority cases, what you asked and what Sir explained is right. See, the mortality is more with the people with comorbid conditions and the elderly patients. But it is not that it is only with the people who have the comorbid conditions suffer viral infection or a severe illness. Severe illness can also happen in younger people. So because they have no comorbid condition, their reserve is good. Actually, they fight the disease well. But we have been seeing that severe cases in younger people also. So there are people who are 30s, 40s, who are actually infected, and it is infected, and there are manifestations of the viral infection, not because of the complication of the pre-existing disease. Because of the viral infection, people have developed symptoms, findings, low oxygen level, but they are still fighting. So if you look at that group and the people, if elderly people with comorbid condition develop this level of hypoxia, this level of low oxygen, they would die faster. But younger people, because of their reserve and their age advantage, they're fighting this hypoxia. But they're also having complications in terms of long time requiring oxygen, all those things are happening. So to put it in a simple words, what you said was right. That is a problem for elderly, but at the same time, it is not only because of the comorbid condition, viral infection and the pneumonia because of the infection is also causing problem.
Dr. Ravindra sir, I have a question for you.
Good, sir.
Now the community spread is an admitted fact and there is no denial. Do you think the kind of rapid testing or other testings which are being done, do you think they are really necessary, or they are adding to the panic which is already in an aggravated position as of now?
I think both Rangnath and Srinivas Katla would be better equipped to answer this question. But still, yes, testing to a certain extent has to happen to see how much of the community spread is happening. But if somebody is thinking that you do this test and there is a treatment for this, there's no. See, there's like has been earlier said, there is no treatment for COVID-19 as such. So this test actually doesn't make a difference in treatment because it's the symptoms that are being treated. But yes, to find out the community spread, the extent of spread, and also to a certain extent to protect the vulnerable population, I think testing has to happen. But I think the concept of this quarantine, the lockdown, I think, again, Dr. Katla has strong thoughts about it. I think we should give up on that. It's a good development that the government has to stop thinking about lockdowns. I think we should let the people go and do their normal work as long as they maintain precautions. And reverse quarantine probably has to be done. Very vulnerable population should be actually protected, and the other people should be left alone to do their job as long as they take care of their personal health.
Sir, do you think that being the president of Karnataka Private Hospitals and Nursing Homes Association, do you think that there is some sort of a hostility from the government side? So far as the private, number one, they are not clearing the dues. And number two, the topmost politicians, they want private nursing homes. At the same time, the private nursing homes and hospitals are branded as some sort of a villains as on today. What is your take on that?
To be very honest, see, the government has actually failed miserably in planning and managing. They had enough time. They have not done it. And because I cannot, since it's a closed group, I'm telling you, we cannot say this in the open because we don't want to create a panic in the community. The government could have prepared better. And because of their lack of preparedness or the confusion that exists in the policymakers, and there are too many cooks that are spoiling the broth, that much I can tell you. And they're shifting the blame onto the private sector. And unfortunately, the media seems to be highlighting all the wrong things. There are a lot of good things that have been done. The private sector, quietly, we are doing a lot of good things. And in spite of the multiple shortcomings like the shortage of manpower, shortage of doctors, see, at least 10 to 15% of the nurses, the ayahs, ward boys, and the doctors in hospitals are falling sick. We are not even giving publicities. We are doing, many of them are really risking their lives and that of the families and providing service. I think instead of acknowledging the good work, very unfortunately, I think our community likes to indulge in negativity and everything. It's very unfortunate, and I think it should have been avoided, and it should be avoided. It is not going to serve anybody at all. If they expect somebody to serve, we don't want them to shower flowers on us, clap for us and all that. At least if they don't trouble us, especially the media, I think it would go a long way in building the morale of the healthcare workers and also the hospitals.
Now, if I can intervene for a bit. See, this is a difference between what has happened in India and elsewhere. Now, the NHS of the United Kingdom, the government there also was not very much in favor of building up the NHS. They were not grants and being a conservative party government. But when COVID struck and when the minister himself got unwell and all those things happened, we are aware of that. They realized that it is strengthening the NHS is the only way to take care of this crisis. So the first thing they did was to increase the salary of the doctors and all the other paramedicals in those hospitals and increase funding. What we have seen, same happened in almost all countries. Be it in Australia, New Zealand, wherever. Everywhere, medical facilities were provided with more funds, doctors were provided with salaries, so on and so forth. But what are we doing in India? The plates were banged and all these things happened, as Dr. Ravindra said, towers were showered us. But as I already pointed out, doctors are not getting their fee. Government has not done much to support the private sector, knowing very well that the 75% of healthcare needs delivered by private sector. You shut down the country, but the government, the state under, as I think has provided, Dr. Ravindra will be in a better position to tell us. They have funded the private hospitals? The answer is no. That is why today the salaries are cut. So as Dr. Ravindra said, not the flowers we need or the Taliban that we need money for the doctors and the staff nurses and all that. The losses that are incurred due to the shutdown by these hospitals has to be borne by the government. And if I can add it here, say legal fraternity is also suffering. I read messages from so many else that we are not able to make our ends meet. So, but the governments in India have not come to the aid of any one of us. They have locked down, but they have not provided commensurate support to the people and the professionals of this country.
What steps the government has to take going ahead, Dr. Srinivas, sir? What concrete suggestions you would like to put forth to the government at the center and the state as such? Very concrete steps.
No, number one, the least I expect from all the governments is to make admission in public that they were wrong clamping the premature term. If they do that, people will understand. They'll say, okay, you made a mistake. Number one. Number two, to the best of their ability, they need to compensate all sectors that have suffered. How they do it, I do not know. They should find a way to compensate. This has been all over the world except India. So the governments of the day should help the poor people, should help the professionals, help all those who are affected by this. Number three, locking down schools and colleges and courts and such other measures should be withdrawn immediately. See, in majority of patients, as we have been discussing, this in fact doesn't cause much problem. If you maintain social distancing and other, as Dr. Ranganath also said, it spreads from very close contact only. So avoid those things. If necessary, you can protect mask or whatever. But allow the court and hospitals and the other institutions to function. That will bring back money in the people's hands and that reduce the level of panic and that is today prevalent in the society.
Sir, you made a very sensitive comment about the establishments, being open. I do not know who is advising our judiciary, but the judiciary at the Supreme Court level and also our High Court level, they are very reluctant to open the court. Even, for example, at least 20 matters before a particular judge and maybe 30 advocates in court hall, that would suffice. But what we see is a complete denial of entry to the courts, and our lawyers are suffering. We have about more than 106,000 advocates in the state of Karnataka, and most of them are now virtually in living in penury. And the Honorable Chief Justice of Karnataka and also the Supreme Court, they are particular that they are not going to open the court soon. Now, do you think that this step is not really advisable, given the fact that at least 20 advocates can be in the court hall? Of course, COVID is there. The staff is affected, judicial officers are affected, everybody is affected. But at the same time, this is the time to live with the virus, and there is nothing that can be done beyond what is already being done. Therefore, do you think that the establishments like Supreme Court and the High Court and the trial courts should be opened from the medical perspective, sir? Any one of you?
Sir, see, this is exactly what Dr. Knell. Yeah, let me put across my view. Dr. Knell, who is the epidemiologist of Sweden, he is the one who has led the COVID control efforts in Sweden. The Prime Minister and the government official or the minister were nowhere to be seen in Sweden in handling COVID. As teacher, Dr. Jessica, I suggest all of you views of the video of Dr. Jessica. Now he had a hearty laugh when New Zealand and Australian media representatives said, rather posted, we have controlled COVID. He said, the moment you allow aeroplanes to land in Australia, you are going to have it again. How long are you going to lock down your country? So I'm asking here, how long are they going to shut down the courts? How long are you going to shut down the hospitals? And so Corona is going to be there with us for centuries. No escaping. If I don't get it today, I'll get it tomorrow. So what needs to be done is that take the basic measure of hygiene, that is keeping the distance, and avoid those who are ill should not be allowed to enter. But that should be from within. You can't, that thermometer that you hold will not act. It only has fever. People may not have fever. So those who have fever should be asked to stay home. They should be reassured and they should be compensated. So what is happening is people are not. So he's coming to the vegetable market. It is his livelihood. So on and so forth. So therefore, coming to the courts, already we have pendency of so many years, so many lakhs and lakhs of cases in each and every court. And we are shutting down courts for this infection. It is simply not that you are not doing your livelihood. It is also going to create backlog, which we will never be able to clear. So therefore, same thing applies to schools. All schools and colleges are closed and we are behaving so 1 year of our children's life is important. No, it is so very important. Because when they reach 20 years, that is the cutoff for getting a job. Are we going to take the date of 1 year behind? We do that. So therefore, now there is evidence all over the world to show that children less than 10 are not at all affected and they are the super spreaders. And between 10 and 20, the rate of infection is so less and their chance of giving the infection to others is also very less. So therefore, we have made all these mistakes. As I said, it is time the government admits its mistake and rectifies it immediately.
Sir Ravindra here, if I can add, see, like what Dr. Kakalaya said, see, it is here to stay and we can't be hiding. For how long will you hide? The moment you come out, even a month, 2 months later, until and unless we have a vaccine or something that works, which is, I don't think will happen very soon. I think we should get along in life. And as long as we take the adequate precautions like physical distancing and wearing the mask, and see, people should be honest to themselves. Like Dr. Kakila said, you can't have doctors, nurses to check everybody. The people have to understand. And there are some apps like Arogya Setu, which actually are quite helpful. I think we should open up to our normalcy because COVID is here to stay, and COVID is probably the new normal. And you asked us one more question, but what is one thing that the government should do to get things back to normalcy? I think the government should immediately stop thinking of this as a disaster. The very fact that they're using the Disaster Management Act to handle a public health issue, there itself shows that their thinking is wrong. I think they should handle it as a public health issue. They should let the experts handle it, not the ministers and the bureaucrats, because they are using the stick. They're using the stick of the Disaster Management Act, which is the wrong. Is the basic mistake they're doing in handling this whole issue. It's a public health issue and should be handled as a public health issue only.
So, thank you all. I will stop recording so that others can ask the questions. Before that, I call upon Mrs. Sinchana to offer the vote of thanks on the occasion. Sinchana, please go ahead. Only 1 second. Yes, Sinchana, please go ahead.
Thanks to Daksha Legal and Mr. Basuraj for this wonderful session on COVID-19 reality check. Thanks to Dr. Ravindra, Dr. Srinivas and Dr. Ranganath for this wonderful articulation on COVID-19. Last but not the least, thanks to Daksha Legal members and all the audience for participating in this session. Have a wonderful evening, stay safe and see you all.
Thank you, Sinchana.